Welcome to the live section of the analysis. You may notice behind me looks a little bit different. We've had a complete sort of switch about with the setup. So you've got a bit more of a background. Going to be sorting out new webcams, new mics, and things hopefully very, very soon to up the level of the content. But we continue after that game against Nottingham Forest, 1-1. Quite a bit to talk about. More or less what we expected in terms of the 4-4-2 from Forest, quite compact, very much driven to force Chelsea into these areas on the outside. And again, as we have mentioned a lot this season, I'll put them on screen now. These deep pockets of space to receive the ball, very important again. The game plan very much was to sustain pressure in their half, allow obviously the likes of Colwill, Kukurea, Fafana to step up. Gusto and Casado is that sort of like tighter pivot today or yesterday, whenever the game was. And again, the wingers were sort of looking to make it narrow on the pitch inside. So you had these pockets for, say, one of Enzo to drop in, pick up the ball in that pocket. But often a lot, Palmer was dropping into that space. And again, he's looking to progress the ball. And he's stepping in on this axis here that we spoke about quite a lot in pre-season. This sort of axis between the wide centre-back and the winger. And this is almost as sort of a ploy of, if this player's going to come out here, it's going to open up space for Fofana to go inside. If the player doesn't come and he wants to sort of lock off that area of the pitch, obviously with Gusto being in here too, Palmer's then got space to either pick up the ball and drive on the outside of the block himself, or to play that ball into Madueke and find that 1v1 isolation, which Chelsea did quite a bit. Madueke was probably the main threat in the game, especially in that first half. He had 14 touches in the box, which sort of brings me to a point that I wanted to make about sort of Chelsea in this game and a lot of sort of the narrative of the disappointment, which I understand the disappointment in this game, right? I'm just moving things as I speak to try and get this into what we saw a lot more of, which was them in quite a low block. Um, Basically, sorry. When you're facing a low block, I think what many people fail to realise is the whole sort of notion of, we're not very good against the low block. We struggle to create. The point of a low block is to nullify chances. It's to stop you creating high level chances. And of course, there's differences. There's ways that this can affect the outlay of a game. So in this sense, Chelsea held a lot more of the ball, and you're trying to constantly break down that block. And at the end of the day, you can identify where the space is as a manager. So as we said, these that's not the right thing. These wide pockets of space, good areas for Palmer or Enzo to drop out, get the ball, and then they can look to face forwards and progress. Again, that axis, they're trying to force you on the inside, so you can often get these isolations, at least trying to make them 1v1 rather than 2v1. So you can sort of circulate the ball around the back. Oh, I'm trying to grab a ball. Circulate the ball around the back, and then as this player is drawn more inside from their rotation from side to side, that ball can quickly go into Sancho or Enzo, who can put it into Sancho, and they can find this 1v1 isolation rather than doing it quickly on each attempt but having a 2v1. So the whole point of circulating it side to side is to sort of disjoint this from this middle four and draw them to one side so that you can then create the isolation on the other. And Chelsea did that well. I think Sancho was very involved. I think he got the ball in quite a good few little positions, which again he looked to create. Madueke especially, he was making little runs in these channels. He was making runs in behind, and we often saw Madueke in these areas in the box, to the point where he was a massive threat. And if on another day a few things drop and we lead in the first half, and it's a completely different game. So against low blocks, if you are creating, and Chelsea created in this game, a lot of the different XG models have it sort of like differently, but most of them have Chelsea above 2 XG. 2.3, I think, was the average that I saw floating around. That's a good amount of generation against of XG generation against a team that have defended really well this season. Forest are no pushovers defensively. Nuno Espirito Santos, good defensive manager. They're set up with these banks of four, and this almost brings me back to another point that I made early in the season, before the season even started. And against a team like this, sometimes to break open a low block, obviously all you have to do, but to break open a low block, you have to change that game state from a 0-0 or a 1-0 down to a leading game state. If Chelsea go 1-0 up in this game, Forest can't sit in that low block. They have to come out, and then Chelsea can then sort of progress and play a different type of game. But to do that, sometimes the routes to goal aren't always the same routes that you'd always find. So again, these spaces, 1v1 isolations, they were the ones that we utilised and we tried to utilise, and we had quite a few long shots which we attempted to change the game state. Palmer took a few, Gusto took a few. Those are the sort of things that you have to do against a low block to try and change the game on its head and get some momentum, get some set pieces. Again, set pieces are a massive game changer. Hopefully we start to see a little bit more from them throughout the season. Enzo took some really poor ones. He had a really poor game. He took some really poor set pieces, so that didn't help at all with the execution of the set pieces, which again can change the game state and it can change the trajectory of the whole game. So it's a tough one, but the one other thing to mention is that as good as Jackson's been this season, and I mentioned it going into the season, against low blocks, Chelsea don't have a box threat to put balls into the box. If you're going to be finding these 1v1 isolations as much as possible when teams are trying to play narrow, they're trying to force you out wide. Chelsea at the minute, you're finding Madueke in these areas, and you're having to drive balls either across the box low, or he's obviously having to cut in. Sometimes he's trying to take the shot himself. He's trying to find somebody on the edge, like Palmer arriving late to sort of hit it along the floor. And he does put the odd, like, there is the odd loop to cross in there, but Jackson, it's not his game really in the air. And I think that this is what I meant when I said that I trust Jackson a lot as a striker, and I think he's brilliant. I really like him in this squad. But I do just think that when the going gets tough and when Chelsea need another option, a plan B, there's not much else Maresca can turn to because Nkunku doesn't offer that either. Nkunku offers something different. He does make that ball stick better when the ball does come into him. So if that ball comes into him here, he does make it stick. He can manipulate it a little bit better to maybe get his own shot off and create his own chance. And he did have a chance with a header late on, which again, he should be scoring. Realistically, he should be. Mudryk, brilliant, coast to coast on that one, brilliant cross in, and Nkunku should score. But the point still remains that Chelsea don't have that box striker that can change a game. And if we're 1-1 at the 65th, 70th minute, and you need to chuck somebody on up front and give you an extra option in the box to either bring these defenders deep with you and make them defend the box, because then you open up more space for these types of shots, more space for little clever passes from somebody like Palmer, sort of into these half spaces, round the back, into these areas. But Jackson doesn't acquire that same gravity, and neither does Nkunku, because ultimately, as good of players they are, they're not as big of an aerial threat, especially when you're standing up against the likes of like Milinkovic and Murillo. So especially Milinkovic, he's a unit. This is where like an Osman was wanted. And again, you could say this in because Jackson's been so good. You could say that Chelsea don't even need the level of Osman. You could even go as far as to say like a Duran when we said it, or there's multiple options. I'm trying to think of the other ones that were linked that give you that same profile, but Chelsea just don't. That's the profile that this squad completely lacks, and it's an issue in these games because I don't think there's much more Maresca could have done. I did say in my analysis after the game, I do think the subs should have come a little bit earlier. I do think Nkunku would have been better suited a little bit earlier than he was. I don't think Jackson was brilliant in this game. Enzo was poor, but I think I would have kept him on until about, like, again, maybe a bit earlier, maybe 60th minute, 70th, like 60, 65th for Felix. I think that was the right sub. I think those two subs that he made, Enzo and Jackson off for Nkunku and Felix, were the right ones, just a little bit too late for my liking. Apart from that, even from a substitution standpoint, Gusto I thought was poor as well until the last 20. But again, the options on the bench without Reece James and sort of the way that we're playing, it didn't really a point for him being subbed off. So I get it. I get why he stayed on the pitch. And apart from that, I don't think Maresca did much wrong. I think that we got into the areas we wanted to do. We was consistent in getting into those 1v1s. We created the chances to win the game. And yes, it got a little bit scrappy at times, especially towards the end. They had their chances too. But my main sort of counterpoint to that would be I think it was just the character, because there was the point between their goal and Chelsea's goal, the Madueke goal, so the Wood goal and the Madueke goal. That was actually the most disappointing part of the game for me until Madueke scores that goal and it sort of jeers everybody up. Because if I was to point out something in this game that disappointed me, it wasn't a tactical sort of error. It wasn't a tactical even sort of pinpoint. It was the body language after that first goal. It looked like almost people, I wouldn't say hiding because it wasn't to that extent, and I'd like to use that word with more purpose, because when people are hiding, that's quite a big thing. But it just felt like nobody really wanted to take the onus of the ball, and it felt very sort of lacking in sense of energy in that sort of little period of the game. Forest actually got a few more chances between that. If you look at the momentum map, it actually tells you they had that momentum even after their goal until the Madueke goal. So which again, that jeered everybody up and it sort of got everybody back up for the game. And from there, we were actually really good. And again, we created the chances to score. But again, with the frantic nature of the end of the game, they also created a few chances for them to score. And again, I think that was more so down to us getting desperate to get the win and almost throwing everything at them than any sort of game plan issues. I don't think we were particularly open in the game. I think that we defended fairly well throughout, and their big chances at the end purely came from desperation rather than a tactical error. So that's pretty much it. There's not much in terms of the subs to go over. Yes, there's more that we can touch on, which we will. We're going to do a tactics talk stream tomorrow, so we'll talk about everything in that, and we can sort of go into each player in more detail. But I think the main points I really wanted to get into were sort of that little bit of box efficiency that we miss, or box dominance that we miss, how we set up, and just a few poor performances, which I think again you can't. If we nearly won a game against a team that had notoriously defended well in the low block this season, we nearly won it 2-1. Which if we did, everybody would have come out of this game with really high expectations, like really positive about the fact that we just scraped a win against another low block. And it came in a game where there was some really poor performances. Palmer had, yes, he had 6 key passes, right? And he had that lovely little touch in this area where he gets a shot away, and he obviously got the assist from Madueke. By his standards, he was in some really good positions in the first half, especially, and it wasn't brilliant from him. He wasn't at his best today at all, or yesterday. So the point I'm trying to make is that with all these poor performances, Enzo, Palmer, I wouldn't like, he wasn't awful, but poor from his standards. Gusto was poor. Corral wasn't brilliant. Jackson was quite hidden in the game, I thought, and the subs came late. All of that into account, and we still deserve to win that game. I think that's more of a good sign than it is a bad sign. And I think, if anything, the main word to take from this game is frustration rather than incompetence. So let's get into the outro. And as I said, please do make sure that you watch the what do you call it, the tactics talk tomorrow, because we'll go into some detail. Once you've watched this video, you can comment some questions. I'll try and take some questions from that into Tactics Talk. And then, of course, if you join the Tactics Talk stream, you can type in the chat and I can answer as many questions as possible. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.